Hello everyone, welcome to this next video in this Python tutorial series. In this video, we're going to cover the conditional statement, the if-else statement. Let's get straight into it. The first thing we're going to look at is the syntax of the if statement. So the if statement contains an if keyword at the beginning, and then you have the value and then the semicolon. And in the next line, first you have an indentation and statements. So all the statements that belong to this if condition are always indented one level in. So what goes on here is that when the Python interpreter is running, when it encounters the if statement, it will look at the value of this statement. Is it true or false? If the value is true, it's going to run the statement that are under the if statement. And these statements which are under the if statement are all the statements that are indented. If this value is false, these statements are not run. This creates a condition. That's why the if statement is referred to as a conditional statement, because the code under the if statement is only run when the certain condition is met. In this case, it's whether this value here is true or false. Now, what kind of value do we expect here for if? So we have two types of values in Python. There are values which are called Falsy values, and there are values which are called Truthy values. The Falsy values include the Boolean false, and the opposite of that in the truth values is true. Another value that's considered a false value is 0. So actually in Python, 0 is the same as false. I'll show you when we go to the interpreter. And the opposite of that is just any value that's not 0. So 0 is considered false, but any value that's not 0 is considered true. And the next false value that we'll look at is the empty string. So that is if you only have quotation marks without anything in between. If you put a space in between, then that's no longer an empty string. That's a string that contains a space. So a space is also a character. So you have to be careful when comparing empty strings. The opposite of an empty string is just any string that has anything, and this is considered a truth value. So this includes a space or any character or anything. And there are many other values which are considered falsy or truthy. We're not going to cover them here because we haven't covered those values yet, and it will just be confusing for most of the people. It won't be helpful. However, when we encounter those values, we're going to mention whether they are falsy values or truthy values, and therefore we'll learn them when the time comes. Let's look at an example of the if statement in the interpreter. So here I have opened VS Code and I've opened the terminal VS Code. You can open the terminal VS Code by going to terminal here and selecting new terminal. So the next thing that I want to do is to open the interpreter. Here I'm going to use IPython instead of just Python. So I'll write again the if statement here. So we had the if statement is if, and then you have a value, any value here. And then you have to indent the code and then the statement that you want to run. So here I'll just put print hello. And for the value, let's start with the value false. You see when I run this, nothing is run here because this is false. As we discussed, this is a false value. Therefore, the print statement is not run. Let's see if I change this to true. We see that the code now runs and it prints hello. And the other false value that we looked at was 0. So you see if I put 0 here, this code won't run. If I put any number here, for example, -1, then it's going to print something here. Same if I put an empty string here, this is a false value, it won't run. But if I put anything, even a space here, you see that now it will run. So that's the concept about if statement in Python. You find that it's very different from if statement in other languages, for example Java, which expects a certain conditional statement to be written here. But in Python, we have this concept of Falsy and Truthy values, and therefore you have to master this. And it's a very easy concept, as you saw. 0, empty string, and false, they are Falsy values. True, any number, any string, they're considered Truthy values. So one thing that I mentioned before is that false is the same as 0 and true is the same as 1. So for example, we can add false and false, and you see this gives us 0 because this is like 0 plus 0, which is 0. And we can add true values, true plus true, and this gives us 2 because this is considered 1 and that is considered 1. Let's look at the next concept to do with if statement. This is to do with Boolean expressions. These are expressions that evaluate whether true or false. So the first expression we're going to look at is the equal to expression. So as you can see, the equal to expression has double equal signs. This is because the single equal sign is used as an assignment operator for naming values. So you can read this as x equal to y. So this is true if x is equal to y. For example, if x is 1 and y is 1, then this will be true. But if x is 2 and y is something else, then this won't be true. So that's the thing with Boolean expressions. The second one is not equal to. You see that the first equal to here is replaced with an exclamation mark. So this is true when x is not equal to y. For example, when x is 1 and y is 2, then this is true because x is not equal to y. The third expression is x greater than y. This is true when x is greater than y. For example, when x is 5 and y is 3. And it's false when x is less than y. The next one is x less than y. And this is true when x is less than y. And it's false when x is greater than y. And next we have the greater or equal to. And you see that the equal to occurs after greater. And this will be true when you have x is greater or equal to y. For example, when x is 2, y can be 2 or y can be 1. So when they are equal, it will be true. And when x is greater, it will also be true. And the next one is x less or equal to y. So the next one is x is y. So this is true when x is y. And you see how you can compare that x is equal to y. The next one is true when x is not y. And you see what exactly this means. Let's go back to the interpreter, we see this. So for a start, let me set x is equal to 1. And let me set y to be equal to 3. So as you know, so when you say x is equal to y, this will be false because x is 1 and y is 3. But if I use the same values, for example, 1 is equal to 1, you see that this is true. The second one that we looked at is greater. So if we set x is greater than y, you see this is false because x is y and y is 3. And finally, let's look at what is means. Let me say x is equal to y. So now x has 3 and y has 3. So if we say x is y, you see that this is true. Why is it so? In Python, we have a function called id. This shows us the id of the variable. And if we say id of x, we see that, and we also compare ID of Y, you see that these have the same IDs. That's why they are equal. So it's actually because of the IDs that they are equal. It's not because they have the same value. But of course, if they have the same IDs, they must have the same value. But sometimes it occurs that they have the same value, but they have different IDs. And in that case, they won't be equal. So usually, because of the way Python works, when you have values like the ones we've covered so far, when you say x is equals to 3, and you also say y is equals to 3, and you check the ID of x, you also check the ID of y, you'll notice that these have the same values. So what happens in this case? Python will create the value 3, and it will give the name x to 3. But in this case, it will see that the 3 is the same. There's another new value being created, 3 here. But because 3 already exists, Python won't create another 3. It will just assign the same 3 another name y. So now x and y, they both refer to the same 3. That's why they have the same IDs here. And when you say x is y, you see that it gives true because they are equal. But if we look at different values that we haven't covered yet, a list, I create an empty list here, and I'll create another empty list here. If you look at these IDs now, you will notice that they're different. You see this one ends in 24, this one ends in 48. And if you say x is y, this is false. So this is because of the way these values behave, that it creates different versions of the empty string. And we'll cover this in the later part, why this is so, and why it's important that these can be the same and these can't be the same. So it's the idea to do with immutable values and mutable values. We'll discuss that later in this series. Let's move on to the next concept called logical operators. Logical operators are a way of operating on two logical values, on true or false. The first logical operator that we'll look at is AND. And this is the way it works. On the left, you can have an expression such as x is greater than y. And on the right, you can have another expression such as z is less than x. And you want to combine these two values, you can use the logical operator AND. This whole expression will be true if the left is true and the right is true. If any of them is false, then this whole expression will be false. So as you know the way AND works, two things have to be the same. For example, if you say that you are going to go for dinner if you have money and if it doesn't rain. So both values have to be true. It shouldn't rain and you should have money. So that's the way the AND operator works. The next operator that we'll look at is OR operator. This is true when any of the two is true. For example, if you say you go for dinner if you have money, or if your friend invites you for dinner. So when anything happens, any of the two is true, you're going to go for dinner. If you have money, you go for dinner. If your friend invites you for dinner, you go for dinner. That's the way the OR operator works. When any of them is true, then the whole expression is true. This is different from the AND operator, which is only true if both of them are true. So that's an important distinction that you should remember. The last one is the NOT operator, which we also saw when we covered the other operators, when we looked at x is not y. So for example, if you say not x greater than y, so if this is false, then not false is true. So that's how the not works. So if you have not true, then it's false. So just the way it sounds. If someone tells you that this is not true, then it means it's false. If someone says you this is not false, then it means it's true. So that's exactly how the true operator works. If this is true, the not true is false. If this is false, the not false is true. So first you have to evaluate what this expression evaluates to. Once you do that, then you can do not that same thing. You get the opposite of it. So that's the not operator. It just gives you the opposite of what you have. If it's not true, it's false. If it's not false, it's true. So it's exactly the opposite. And let's see how we can combine the AND operator. So if we have x is equals to 1, we have y is equals to 3, and we also have z is equals to 3. So we can say x less than y and y equal to z. So here we can see that y and z have the same values. They both have 3's. So this expression here will be true. X is 1 and y is 3. So we know that 1 is less than 3. So this is true and this is true. Therefore, the outcome is true. But if we change x, for example, let's change this to 5. And let's do the expression now. We know that 5 is not less than 3. So this is false. And the other side is true. But for the AND operator, we need both sides to be true. So when you do this evaluation, it will be false. But if we change this to the OR operator, we know that for the OR operator, it's true when n of the sides is true. So we know that this is false, but this is true. So when you do that, we get true. So we can check, we can verify each side. So for example, if we do this, we can verify that this is false, and we can verify that this is true. So this, work out this, it's false. You can work out the other one, which is true. So false or true, which if there's only one true thing and it works. For example, if we change the expression here and we made this false, then this will be false because there's no true value in this expression. And the final thing that we want to do is to use the NOT operator. So let's look at not x less than y. As we already know, x is not less than y. So this is false, but not false is what? Not false is true. Now if we change this to true, because 5 is greater than 3, and this not true is false. So then we can now combine different conditions to write an if statement. So for this case, we could write something like if x is less than y and y is equals to z, print hello. You see that it doesn't do anything because x is 5 and y is 3. So this won't work. So depending on the conditions we are looking at, if we need both conditions to be true, then it's a good place to use AND. For example, if you can only go for dinner if you have money and it doesn't rain, then it's a good place to use AND. But if you can go for dinner, for example, if you have money or if your friend invites you, then you can use the OR operator in that case, because any of them being true works for you. You want to do the activity if any of them is true. So that's how we use the AND operator. We can combine different values to work out that. Next, let's look at the syntax of the if-else statement. So we have the if statement, the one we've already looked at. So you have the if keyword, the value the colon, and you have an indentation here, one level indentation, and your statement, and then you have else. So with the else, you don't put any value there, so you just put the space and the statement. So what this does is that if this is true, it will run this, otherwise it will run this statement. So it can only run one of the two statements. So we can look at the example for that. For example, we can say x is equals to 2, and we can say if x is greater than 2, print true, else print false. So here you can see we have if and the value. So if you have more values to compare, you can always combine them using the logical operator and or not. And here you have the else statement and the full colon, and you can see that we indent this code, and you can run this, and you see because 2 is not greater than 2, so this is false, so it doesn't print this true. It actually skips and prints the false. So this is why if this value is true, do this, otherwise do that. That's how the if statement works. So this is the if, else if, and else statement. So if value is true, remember that indentation, very important in Python. So if this value is true, it will run this statement. And you have now else if this value is true, run this statement. And finally, you can have an else statement and run that statement. So now what this does is it will check first this value. If this value is true, it will run that, and that will be the end of this whole if, else if, and else statement. So I'll give the case of the example that we just talked about, which is for the score. Let's say we have the score, someone scores above 85. So we want to give this some grades. So we can say if the score is greater than 90, we want to print the grade to be B, to be A. If the score is greater than 80, we want to print a B. We can have as many as we need here if the score is above 70. We can say the score now is a C. And else we can say print fail. So what this will do is it will first check whether 85 is greater than 90. If so, it will print A. If not, it will check if this score is greater than 80. If so, it will print B. If not, it will check whether the score is greater than 70 and it will print C. Otherwise, it will print that. So as you can see here, because Python runs from top to bottom, I've put the highest value at the top here. So it's 90, 80, 70. Because if I put a smallest value here, then when it checks that, for example, if I put 70 here, then 85 will be greater than 70 and it will print a C. I'll show you. You see here it prints a B because the statement that's true is here. So let's say I change this, I put it the other way around. I start with 70 here. I put a C and I put 90 here. And I put an A. So this won't work because we are looking at the value of 85, or any value that's just above 70 will print a C, because Python will run from top to bottom. So when it just finds this is greater than 70, it will print a C. So for any value above 70 to print a C. So even if someone got 80 or 90, it won't work, because the first thing it will encounter is, oh, this is greater than a 70, it's true, so it will do that. So you see it prints C. So if I change the score, for example, to 100, and run the same code, it will still print C because the value is above 70. So that's one thing you should be careful about when you're looking at the order, because it only runs one of them. So you have to make sure that the order you put these values makes sense for your case. In this case, because I'm looking at values greater than 7, greater than a certain amount, it's better to put the order in the opposite way, where we have the largest value at the top, 90. Because if the value is above 90, this will run, but this won't run. But if it's less than 90, obviously this will fail and it will check this. And if the value is less than 80, it will check this. Otherwise, it will print that. So something that we should just be careful about. So that's the end of this video. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section below. I would like to thank all my subscribers. And if you enjoyed this video and you haven't subscribed, ensure that you subscribe so that you can receive a notification when I upload the next video. In the next video, we are going to cover iterations. In the next video, we are going to cover iterations, which includes the while loop, the for loop, and all the other loops. So I hope you can join me in the next video. Thank you.